Hello, everybody. My name is Nabil Andrian, and this is the Chemmunicator. First of all, I want to say thank you, Dr. Korgel, for coming for us to visit. Like I said, my name is Nabil. I'm the Student Development Chair here. This podcast, we're going to talk about a lot of things, mainly about, Dr. Korgel's research, his work in energy, some things he's interested in, like art, stuff like that, and, maybe a bit of other stuff. But yeah, so Dr. Korgel, take it away.
Take it away.
Take it away, yeah. Tell me about yourself.
I'm happy to be here. Yeah, so Brian Korgel, I've been at University of Texas at Austin since 1998. So this is, I think, my 25th year here. So time flies. I'm not from Texas originally. I was born in Denver, Colorado, and then when I was about 10, my family moved to San Diego, and then I went to undergrad and grad school at UCLA, and then did a postdoc at University College Dublin in Ireland, and then came here. So my research area is nanomaterials chemistry, so we make different kinds of materials. I've started 2 companies, one called Novolite, one called Pinion, during my time here. Currently director of the Energy Institute for UT, which is fun. And I've been directing a center called the Center for Solar Powered Future, SPF 2050, for about 14 years. So that's kind of a little bit of background.
Wow.
I've graduated like 51 PhD students.
51 PhD.
Every time I have to write letters of recommendation for y'all, for undergrads, for grad school or whatever, they're like, how many students have you interacted with, like undergrads? And so it's a lot. 25 years, 120 of you graduate every year. I'm teaching like 1 class a year now, but usually teach like materials, 350. There's one point, and I've been doing that for a while, maybe 20 years. And so at one point I was teaching materials like in the fall, the spring, and even a summer session. Wow. So I was basically getting all of you every year. I miss that a little bit, but so I've been teaching for a while, interacting with lots and lots of students.
Got it. So you said your research is on nanomaterials. Specifically, what do you guys do in the Korgel research group, like specifics?
Oh, well, so we make nanoparticles. So this last year, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry went for quantum dots.
Yeah, quantum dots.
So I actually know like Lou Bruce and Mundi Buendi fairly well, who are 2 of the 3 Nobel Prize winners. And so that's my research area, is quantum dots. I started working in that area during grad school. So I was originally like a bio person. So when I was an undergrad, I became a chemical engineer by default. So people were like, oh, how'd you go into chemical engineering? But I basically got put there because, so when I applied to undergrad, at that time, I really thought I wanted to go to medical school. And there's like no pre-med major or whatever, so you have to pick a major. Yeah. I always liked chemistry, I liked biology, physics, all of that. So I wanted to challenge myself a little bit. So I picked as a major bioengineering, got into UCLA, showed up on like day 1 to register for your classes. And registration is a little different back then. You actually went in person to a person and like talked about your schedule.
It wasn't like the Hunger Games at all.
No. Well, there might have been certain classes that got filled up, but no, you go there, you talk to someone. And so I showed up to register for my classes, and they were like, oh, you're the guy, like your major no longer exists. And so they didn't tell me before I showed up. And so they had a major in bioengineering. I guess students wasn't that popular, and so they collapsed it into chemical engineering. So I became a chemical engineer with a bioengineering option. So they tried to accommodate us with that. And so I didn't know anything about chemical engineering at the time. I was from San Diego, so I'm not like a lot of you. I think people in Texas kind of know something about chemical engineering, but not really the same necessarily in California. So, but I really like chemistry, and there's engineering, and there's still a bio component. So it's like, okay, I'll do that. I really loved, my interest changed. I did research in a lab. My interest changed. I decided not to go to medical school and instead go to grad school in chemical engineering. But I was really enamored with like molecular biology, biotechnology. I took a class in recombinant DNA technology from one of the technical founders of Amgen. So that's how I got exposed a little bit to like startups, kind of during that time. So when I went to grad school, I worked for a professor, Helmut Biquet, who's really a bio person. And when I was in grad school, I was extracting tetraether lipids from archaea, from archaebacteria, and trying to make liposomes from these. So that's what I was doing. And Hal had gone and seen some talk at a conference, and they were using liposomes to make quantum dots. And he came back to the lab, and he's super excited, and I'm in the lab working. He comes in, and he says, "Brian, have you heard of quantum dots before?" And I had never heard of quantum dots, but I didn't know what he was talking about. I never actually had a materials class. It wasn't required at UCLA. I really didn't know what a semiconductor was at the time, all that. So I was like, oh, I was pretty open-minded. So I started working on that, like making these quantum dots. And then just over the course of my PhD, got really interested in that. I took some classes like inorganic chemistry and solid-state chemistry and all that, and learned what a semiconductor was. And so by the time I was graduating, I'd kind of lost interest in the bio part and was really interested in quantum dots and how do you make them at scale. As a chemical engineer, I was like really interested in applications of them. So this was when I started my postdoc at UCD in Ireland. That was 1997, and then I started here in 98. And when I came in 1998, it was under Clinton, I think. They had just started the National Nanotechnology Initiative.
Yeah.
So nanotechnology was suddenly like a buzzword. Yeah, it's right when I started here. And so my goals were like, I was always interested in the chemistry. I did a postdoc in a chemistry department. So I was interested in fundamental research. How do you make these things? What are their properties? But as a chemical engineer, I was really interested in their applications. And so when I gave my like chalk talk, so when you do an interview for a faculty position, you come, you meet with a bunch of people, you give a seminar on your research, and then you also give kind of like a chalk talk on your envisioned research program. Yeah. So my chalk talk was like, okay, you can make these nanocrystals of semiconductors, metals, magnets, control their properties by size. So it's like a tuning parameter if you think of it in engineering terms. And so like, what can you do with all this stuff? You can make like new memory devices, new transistors, light emitting devices, solar cells. So the vision for my research group when I came to UT was basically further developing all the chemistry of these materials, because you can only make a few different kinds of materials at a time. So expanding that, learning what their properties were, but then really putting them into applications. And that's been the focus of my group, continues to be since I've been here. There's still lots of materials that haven't been made before, so we still are developing new chemistry for different kinds of materials, looking at those applications, or medical applications. Right now we're looking at like potassium-ion batteries, so moving batteries beyond lithium-ion, fuel cell membranes for hydrogen, applications like that. So really wide range of activities.
Yeah. So you talked about, so actually what I was going to say is that I read this book in the PCL. It's called like Nanotechnology, Science, Technology, and Innovation. And that book was published in like the early 2000s when nanotech was, like you said, being a buzzword. And so I learned a lot about the innovation part of like nanotech and semiconductors. I learned a lot about Moore's law, top down, bottom up, all that kind of stuff. And basically, like you said, your old major was basically liquidated and then turned into chemical engineering. It turned into this, like your background in chemical engineering, and a lot of chemical engineers, they go into industry, nowadays. Right. So how did your background kind of go into like your two startups? Like you
into the startups
instead of going, a lot of chemical engineers they go industry. You went to the startup path,
Well, I went academic path. So so when I started my PhD, I decided to do my PhD because I discovered I really liked research. I had a summer research project, and it was a really cool opportunity because the guy, Hal Monbiquet, who became my PhD advisor, actually was my undergrad advisor too.
Yeah.
And so he gave me kind of my own research project. I was sort of finishing out this project that a postdoc had started, and there was no one in the lab. So I was basically doing my own research as like a grad student would, and I got exposed to that, and I discovered I liked it, and I was pretty good at it. And so I had that interest, plus I was getting exposed to this like biotech startup stuff.
Yeah.
Like, so in our biochemical engineering class, we did a field trip out to Thousand Oaks, which is kind of the outskirts of LA where Amgen was.
Yeah.
Because our professor of that class knew like the chief scientist or whatever who was a chemical engineer. So we toured the facility. I had this class in recombinant DNA technology, and the way that guy put it is he was like, when people first started discovering how to do like manipulate DNA and do all that stuff, all these venture capitalists were like wandering the halls of the university trying to find stuff to like invest in. And I was like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. So when I started my PhD, I was like, okay, I want to get a PhD and I want to start like Amgen too. That was my goal. And then when I got into grad school, I discovered I actually really loved doing research and science. And I TA'd a class. I TA'd thermo, and enjoyed that. I enjoyed kind of trying to teach weird concepts like fugacity and activity and stuff. And so about a year and a half into grad school, my goals really sort of changed from startup. Now I want to become a professor. And so there's certain things you need to do during grad school to set yourself up to be a professor. You got to publish papers, but you need to give some talks. You need to network, stuff like that. So everything I did, including the postdoc, was really just focused on my scholarship, publishing papers, doing all that. So when I came to UT, I had totally dropped like the startup idea. I was just a kind of pure academic. And what happened is nanotechnology became a thing. And it was really weird because there literally were venture capitalists wandering the halls of the university back in like 98 when I had started, 99, 2000. And there weren't a lot of, it was kind of a new area. And so there weren't a lot of folks at UT doing nanotechnology. So all these venture capitalists, when they came to UT, they basically find me and come talk to me in my office and stuff like that. And then I had people we'd published a couple of interesting papers. Like in 2000, we published a paper in Science making silicon nanowires, and then 2001 published a paper on silicon quantum dots in Journal of American Chemical Society. And so this stuff was getting a lot of press and all of that. So now these venture capitalists were not just trying to understand nanotechnology, but they were pitching me on why I should start a company with them. And I was like, most of them kind of, I'm not sure I trust you enough to start a company with you. Yeah, but like, I was meeting with someone probably every week, for nearly a year, and these ideas were coming up. And so I ended up having a meeting with some folks who were part of a company called Nanosys, which came really out of Charlie Lieber and Hong Kong Park's lab at Harvard. But they were out like sucking up all this patent portfolio from all the big people, Moonji Bawendi, Paul Alvasatos, Jim Heath, Peidong Yang, all of this sort of thing. And so they were talking to me about that. And as we got into discussions, the investors in Nanosys, who initially were interested in pulling me into Nanosys, were like, you know what, we should just do our own company. And that was how Innovolite was created. We got like a little $10,000 grant to try to make a light emitting diode with these materials, and then did that, and then the company was launched. and it was kind of a surreal experience, because I remember being at some of these meetings with these venture capitalists and explaining to me what documents I was signing, and I was just like, okay, I think I know what I'm doing. Because I think now you as students have access to resources. If you want to learn how to be an entrepreneur and what is innovation and tech transfer, even as an undergrad, there are classes or resources. That stuff didn't exist when I was a student. So it was really kind of just learning on the fly. And then at UT in our department in Chemie, it's actually a pretty entrepreneurial department. So like we had some folks who had done some startup type stuff also that I could talk to a little bit. So like Adam Heller who made like $1 billion company, so I had a few people I could talk to, but it was kind of learning on the fly. And it was kind of an interesting transition, being fully academic to still doing that, and then trying to help launch this startup. And so Innovolite, was initially doing lighting and then transitioned to solar in like 2005 or so, 2004, 2005. And then made a solar cell technology, and DuPont bought Innovolite in 2011. And I ended up starting another company in 2007 called Pinion, which was doing printed transistors. So that was like silicon nanowires for thin film transistors, which is the back electronics and displays. And then that company was also acquired by another big company in 2011. And so the model for both those companies were very different. One was a big VC funded thing, and the other one was just a small SBIR grants and all that. So those experiences were really interesting. I never really wanted to leave the university to just go to the startup. I'm still an academic at heart. But I think seeing how to take a technology like you discover in the lab and then get it to commercialization, like what all that takes, kind of how hard it is, and what the various pivot points are and business models, was really a great learning experience, sometimes difficult, and really has shaped how I continue to do research and approach scholarship in my lab, and so it's been really cool to see at a university how education, discoveries, and then interacting with companies, trying to do technology development and everything, how it all works.
So when I was doing research for this interview, I looked up your name a bunch, and it's always the biggest word that comes associated with Dr. Korgel is innovation. That's the thing, right?
Okay.
So when I think of innovation, like, he's the director of Energy Institute, 2 startups, all this, and everything you said, of course.
Right.
When I think of the word innovation, like, what does it mean to be innovative? And I think creativity, right? Obviously, you're a very creative person, and which leads me to, think about your program, the Arts and Sciences, Arts plus Sciences, and I wanted to know about like the genesis of that, like what has come to now, like why'd you do it in the first place? Stuff like that.
It's kind of crazy. So I'm an artist also. Like I didn't, when I started here at UT, I wouldn't go around telling people I'm an artist, and I wasn't really making art. In grad school, I'd always had a lot of artistic interests, so I actually wrote a lot of poetry. I was one of the editors of the UCLA Poetry Journal for a couple of years, and did poetry readings. I was in a band for like 4 years.
What'd you play?
I played bass and sang, and really kind of wrote all our songs and stuff. I was also like kind of our manager, so I was really good at getting gigs and things like that as well. So I did. I was hustling back in grad school as well, in a way. So I have this courtesy appointment in art and art history department as a professor, as a 0% appointment, and no one really knows about it. The dean of fine arts liked me and was like, you should be part of the art and art history department. I think they, could benefit from you or whatever. And so he kind of made things work, and I have that. I got into really into art and making art through a weird process that's kind of the way everything in my life has evolved. Like nothing has been planned, and it's always just me following my intuition and what I'm interested in at the time. Like when I started at UCLA, for example, as an undergrad, I had no intention of becoming a professor. In fact, someone would say, "You become a professor," I'd be like, "No, I would never want to do that. Why would I want to spend my life toiling away to accomplish something that I never accomplished?" You know, it's like that was the impression I had of what a professor did. And so for art, like I didn't know people who were working artists or anything, so I don't know how you like make a living as an artist. So when I was in grad school, you know, I was drawing a lot and doing things, but it never seemed like something I could have like a career at or anything like that. So I get into art because I saw this ad for a meeting in Moscow in Russia. This was probably the meeting was maybe 9 years ago, maybe now. It was being organized by MIT at a new university in Russia called Skolkovo Institute of Technology. And Russia set up Skoltech to become kind of a MIT in Russia that was all focused on innovation. So MIT created this 1 week thing they called Ideas Lab, where they invited like 34 professors from different disciplines from all over the world to come meet in a hotel in Moscow to talk about like innovation.
Yeah.
What kind of research would you do to come up with new innovative models to speed up commercialization of technology from public institution to the commercial sector? So I went to that because of my business kind of innovation stuff. Started 2 companies. My solar center is kind of like a startup. It's in a way because it's connected to industry folks, and it's like a new sort of model. So I went to that, and at that meeting, I ended up meeting an artist named James Sham, who's a professor at George Washington University, and they did a meet and greet thing at the beginning of this meeting where they put people in little continents that we had to do like a personality profile or something like that. And so they grouped people on continents by similarities. And James and I ended up each on our own island. So like we ended up not having anyone to talk to, and we're both on an island, and we're like, oh, I guess maybe we'll just talk to each other. So that was how I met James, and over the course of that week, we got to know each other and came up with an idea for a grant we called Rapid Design Pivot, to bring artists and scientists together to speed up commercialization and development of technology process, where artists are actually in the lab and working with scientists.
That's so interesting.
So we got a grant from them to do that, and then over the course of that grant, I was kind of like project manager of these artists. We'd bring artists to UT, we'd go to Moscow, bring artists, talk to scientists there, and I started to meet the artists, and then we were working up to like an installation where the artists were making work based on their interactions with scientists, and that was held at UT in the Visual Arts Center. There's a gallery called Visual Arts Center, and as we were working up to doing that, one of the artists, his name was Daniel Boschkoff, who's a professor at Hunter College but also an artist, decided to live in my office for like 4 months. So I had he built a loft in my office on the top floor
like
of
actually
NHB. Yeah, it was a lot. He would sleep there, and there was a little desk area, elevated desk that he carved out. And there was like a shower on the ground floor. So he lives in New York City. So he'd come out for 2 or 3 weeks. We were trying to connect the artist to the scientists, and it was really hard because we're busy.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like literally like finding time on a schedule.
Okay.
You know, if he's at an Airbnb, he's got to come over to campus and all that.
Okay.
So the idea is like he's going to be embedded in my lab. He called that the Institute for Higher Listening, location number 5, because I think he'd done this a couple times before. So Daniel and I would see Daniel every morning, and we go have breakfast tacos. I would teach him a little bit about nanotechnology, and he'd teach me a little bit about art. And at that time, I didn't fully appreciate what like contemporary artists do. You know, my impression is like, okay, Picasso and whatever. So Daniel expanded my world knowledge of art and all that. So that was happening, and then we got towards the installation, and James and Daniel, I had lunch with them, and at Kirby Lane, because I remember this, and they were both like, you need to make something for the show. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know how to make anything for the show. So they really insisted, and so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to make something. I got really nervous about it and felt the pressure, but then came up with something and made an installation for the show. And that kind of suddenly made me an artist. You know, I loved doing that, and now I think I've done 4 or 5 installations since then, and so that's how I got kind of into art or back into art or whatever, was through that process.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I think unfortunately that is all the time we have left for today. I enjoyed talking to you very much. Thank you for coming out once again. But yeah, so thank you so much. Do you have any closing remarks before we sign off?
No, not really. I mean, for all the students out there watching, like, I think don't underestimate all the things you can do with your life and the fun stuff, and just follow your passions. It'll all open up for you.
Well, sounds good.
All right.
Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Again, this was Dr. Brian Korgel. I had a lot of fun doing this. I hope you had a lot of fun doing this.
Yeah, it's great.
All right,
Thanks.
cool. All right. And yeah, that'll be it for today.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye.